Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is called The Disciples Who Never Died. This has been one of those instances where I have been planning for the past 2 days to do a completely different topic. And in fact, I spent quite a bit of time yesterday researching for the other topic I was going to do. But my studies today, as I was reading the book on preterism that I was graciously sent by John Paul Miles, the author of the preterist website that I had used on my video last week, I should say the main one that I used, because I used several websites, but I used one called Revelations in Grace because it's very, very comprehensive and well written. He sent me his book. I have been reading it. And so I've had a lot of wheels turning in my head regarding preterism. However, since I did not actually plan on doing this video on preterism, this isn't going to be a really extensive video on the topic. It's just going to be on something that I happened to come across as I was looking into these things. And in fact, the question that I'm exploring today, I can't even claim that it's a preterist point of view. It just came about as I was reading this book and thinking about the verses. I'm going to give you a very basic overview of the preterist view on the resurrection, and that would be including the first resurrection and the general resurrection, which is sometimes also called the resurrection of the wicked. Not just because only the wicked are resurrected at that time, but because that one actually includes the wicked, whereas the first resurrection does not. And I will be doing a video on that, Lord willing, on the resurrections, more in depth, hopefully either next week or the following week. I do have some appointments coming up, so I'm not quite sure. But I just want to give you the basics right here, just so that you will understand where I'm coming from for this video. So the preterist point of view is that the time of Jesus's crucifixion and when he was resurrected, and the Gospels tell us that there were graves who were opened and saints who came out of their grave. When Jesus ascended 40 days later, that those saints that had come out of their graves ascended with him, and that they were the first resurrection that is spoken of in Revelation 20. So let's just go to Revelation 20. I'm just going to read verses 1 through 3 because I feel like I have exhaustively read this passage over and over and over again for a very long time on here, but it's relevant to what I'm discussing today. So Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3 says, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while." Okay, I'm also going to read 4 through 6 because I just realized that this is actually the passage that I wanted. You just got a little extra there. "Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Okay, so in the preterist point of view, the ones who came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years were the saints who came out of their graves at his resurrection. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So we're back on this chart. So the first resurrection, they believe, is what happened at the resurrection of Christ, after the crucifixion 40 days later when he ascended. Okay, now in the preterist point of view, the 1,000 years is figurative, and I will again at some point in a future video go over the reasons why they consider that to be figurative. It has a lot to do with how the Hebrews at that time divided their ages. Okay, so but for now, you just have to know that the full preterist point of view is very often that the 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 millennium was actually only 40 years, and that would be a generation, a biblical generation. And then around 66 to 70 AD is when they believe the general resurrection happened, and there is some historical evidence that they use that points to that being a possibility of it happening in 66 AD. So preterist point of view, yes, both resurrections have already happened. We have the first resurrection around 30 AD. We have the general resurrection happening. It says 70 AD here, but more specifically, probably around 66 AD is when they believe the general resurrection occurred. Someone left a comment on, I believe it was that video, with what many people refer to as the rapture verse. It's the verse that they think points to the rapture. 1 Thessalonians 4:16. And I'm going to take a look at 1 Thessalonians 4:16 to 17 because it got me thinking. I'm like, okay, I'm going to look this up, and because I really need to think about this. So let's read 1 Thessalonians 4:16 to 17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. So, if you look at this passage, the historical, we'll just say, occurrence that they refer to is it involves Nero, and they were building a canal, and they struck the ground, and there was the sound of a trumpet, and they heard and saw many disembodied spirits and phantoms. And so it is thought that this is actually the time of the general resurrection, and actually this happened just a couple weeks after heavenly armies were seen in the clouds in 66 AD also, and this happened over Jerusalem. So, and it says that the dead in Christ will rise first. Then it says, then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Now, this is why many people think of this as being the rapture. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And my thought is that Paul was writing to the people, to the believers of his time. That's why he said we. He was fully expecting that he would be alive during this time, and that the believers that he was writing to, that some of them might, I won't say that he thought he would be alive. He thought there was a possibility he'd be alive, and he definitely thought that some of them would still be alive also as all of this was happening. So I started thinking to myself, okay, so what happens? So let's think about the disciples. Some of the disciples we know died before 66 to 70 AD. Okay, we're just guessing at the years as of right now. But I thought, what about the ones who were alive? Because there are verses that tell us that some of them will be alive at this time. Let's see. So Matthew 16:28 tells us, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So my thought process is, okay, well, the dead will rise first, but then those who are alive, what happened to them? Are they then going to go and be with Jesus then also, even though they're still alive? And so I got it in my head, all right, you know what? I'm going to look up when all of the disciples died, because the verse Matthew tells us that some of them will still be standing there who will see him coming in his kingdom at this time. So some of them, should definitely not have had a death date before this happened. So I looked this up. When and how did the 12 apostles die? And lo and behold, I discovered that there were 3 apostles who their death dates, the details of their deaths, no information on them at all. So it tells us here, the Bible only mentions the deaths of 2 apostles, James, who was put to death by Herod Agrippa I in 44 AD, and Judas Iscariot, who committed suicide shortly after the death of Christ. The details of the deaths of 3 of the apostles, John the Beloved, Bartholomew, and Simon the Canaanite, are not known at all, either by tradition or early historians. The deaths of the other 7 apostles are known by tradition or the writings of early Christian historians. According to traditions and the Bible, 8 of the apostles died as martyrs. At least 2 of the apostles, Peter and Andrew, were crucified. So first of all, I have to say that this is probably where I'm deviating from the preterist point of view, because I believe that the preterists believe that even when it comes to the 1 Thessalonians verse, and I could be wrong. If you're a preterist and I'm wrong, please leave a comment, because I'm not an authority on this. I'm just sharing what I have learned, and a lot of times just what I'm assuming when things are not mentioned. But it says, then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So since it's not really mentioned, at least so far from what I've seen, I'm assuming that they just mean that those who are already dead at that time will rise when he actually came back. And then the rest of them, once they did end up passing away, instead of going to Hades, they would immediately go and be with the Lord in heaven. That's what I'm assuming. Now, what I find very interesting, okay, is that John is one of them that they don't have any information for his death. And so the way that my mind works, I'm thinking to myself, could it be because these apostles, maybe they didn't die? Maybe they, after the general resurrection, then they also went up with Christ. And it would have been with other believers as well. But I was just thinking of the disciples. And in fact, this is why a lot of people, I believe it's called the Highlander theory, where there are some who think that there are still some disciples who are still walking around the earth, because it says, I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, because they think that Jesus has not returned yet. And so maybe these disciples are still walking around kind of like immortals. And I'm going to say that if he did, in fact, return long ago, then it would make sense, that they would still be alive at that time. Now, it does say in John 21:22, Jesus said to him, and he's talking to Peter about John, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. So yeah, that's why I do find it interesting that John is one of them, that there is no information on his death there. I will read the context to you, though. It does say, when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain until I return, what is that to you? You follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. However, Jesus did not say that he would not die, but only, if I want him to remain until I return, what is that to you? So that's the specifics of it. Jesus did not specifically say that he wouldn't die, but he did say, if I don't want him to die until I come back, what business is that of yours, Peter? That's basically what he meant. So if we look down this list of the disciples, so it'll tell us Simon, called Peter by Christ, died 33 to 34 years after the death of Christ. I'll leave this link in the description if you want to read through all of it. James, the son of Zebedee, was put to death by Herod Agrippa I in the year 44. John, no death date given by early writers. Death date is by conjecture only and is variously assigned as being between 89 AD to 120 AD. Andrew, no accurate death date given. A variety of traditions says he preached in Scythia in Greece, in Asia Minor, and Thrace. He is reported to have been crucified at Petrea in Achaia. So even though with Andrew there's no accurate death date, but there is some sort of story of how he died. With John, there's nothing. So with Philip, again, it says again, the Bible does not say when he died, nor do we have accurate information. According to tradition, he preached in Phrygia and died at Hierapolis. So again, there's at least some clue as to what may have happened to him, unlike John, where there's nothing. Bartholomew, again, nothing. There is no information concerning his death, not even by tradition. We have Matthew, and it says pretty much about Matthew, but it says there is a legend that he died a martyr in Ethiopia. Thomas, it gives you a paragraph about what happened to him. James Alphaeus, it tells us with him. But again, now we get to Simon the Canaanite. No information either in the Bible or by tradition. And then we have information about Jude. And then, yeah, we know what happened to Judas Iscariot. But again, we're back to this. And I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And he was talking to those who were standing there with him. And then we have this verse in 1 Thessalonians. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So that's just a thought that I have. Is it possible that at the time of the general resurrection, after the dead in Christ rose first, did they then, just like it says, did they go to meet the Lord in the air? Again, I'm not saying this is what preterists believe, because I'm fairly certain that they believe that they would have also lived their life, died, and then, gone straight to heaven after their death. But if you're looking at it that way, I find it very, very interesting. And again, I'm going to have a more extensive video on what I've learned about the first and second resurrection, and I'll share more of the historical information that they have regarding it, and also some really interesting things that I found in which Pontius Pilate actually wrote about the crucifixion and about the saints rising. So that's going to be a good one, I think. But for now, I just am going to share some bonus content with you, because I went to Lost River Caverns. Actually, let's go down here. I went to Lost River Caverns yesterday with my friend and my children, and I thought that I would share some photographs with you. And unfortunately, I didn't have any like eureka moments or aha moments where I absolutely knew for certain that I was looking at something like completely different than what they were telling us. But I did find some really intriguing things that made me think. But first, let's read the history of Lost River Caverns. I won't read the whole thing, but it says, during the late 19th century, an active limestone quarry operated where the parking lot is now located. The cavern entrance was first opened to the surface in 1883. And I'm like, wow, we've got 1883 here. It's always around 1890 that these things happen. That's around the year that the opening was found to Bedbug Cave, right behind me, which was another quarry. But instead of being a limestone quarry, that was a slate quarry. So just another thing to add to the whole 1890 narrative. But anyway, by quarry workers when they ignited a black powder blast to remove limestone from the cliff face. The first systematic exploration of the caverns occurred in 1886 during an expedition sponsored by Lehigh University and was detailed in the Bethlehem Daily Times of that era. In the years following the cavern's discovery, local residents found the underground spaces ideal for a variety of uses, including a ballroom. Imagine that, using a cave as a ballroom. It gets better though, just wait. During the late 1800s, a wooden dance floor was constructed in what is now called the Crystal Chapel, and regular dances were held in the natural air conditioning of the cave. Now take a look at this. At the beginning of the 20th century, the cave's colorful history includes college fraternities holding initiation ceremonies in some of the further underground chambers, and bootleggers preferred the cave's dark recesses to secretly store their wares during the Prohibition era. So some pretty clandestine, is that how you pronounce it, stuff happened down here. And I'm just going to share with you what I saw while we were there. And some of it, I will comment on, and other things I will not. Now, this was actually on the way out. It seemed to be it definitely took you to a different part of the cave that you weren't allowed to explore, very tight spaces. Now, I was looking for evidence that of things that would look like specifically brick, melted brick. And I was not able to find anything like that. There is what looks to me to be either melt or some sort of biological material, but I'm not really sure. So this up here, this was really high up in the ceiling. And I just liked to take pictures of the crevices up there because, I always wonder what's in those areas. Because apparently when they found the entrance, when they blasted the entrance, it had been completely sealed for thousands of years. So like the only reason now, there was no life in there at all whatsoever. And even now they have a door there and everything. So there's no animals in there or anything like that. But there is algae, and that is because people now come in on the tours. They track the algae in, like on their clothing and shoes, and then so that introduces algae to the cave. But there was nothing like that in there, what they say when they found it. So there is some water. It's called Lost River Caverns, right? But this is water. I don't believe this was actually part of the river, though. This is just running down from the cave, probably through the soil and everything. My children sticking their hands in it because they were allowed to there. And that's just another picture of that. Just lots of stuff that you would typically expect to find in caves. Lots of little stalactites, and a lot of it does look like melt because stalactites, they just have that appearance. Just more of the same, lots of it everywhere. It was really interesting to be there. I think that the tour guide, he was funny and he was informative, but he didn't really give us enough time to like take pictures and everything. Now, one of the interesting things that I thought about the cave, that I found out about the cave, is that he said that there was a lot of mud and clay, hardened mud and clay throughout the cave. And that immediately made me think of a mud flood, possibly, coming through into this cave, because some of the hardened mud and clay was, I would say, a good 8 to 10 feet high in huge piles in this cave. So, yeah, if anyone has any observations, some things that I missed, let me know. Because again, I didn't really find anything that I was like, oh my gosh, I know what that is. This is the river. And the interesting thing about the river is that they don't know where the water comes from or where it's going. So they put a dye in and they tried to see where it would come out at, and it didn't come out anywhere. So they believe that there's an underwater source, which, lends credence to the whole idea. There are underwater rivers, not underwater. Well, there are underwater rivers too, but there are underground oceans, underground rivers, and, you just think of the waters below. Now, I know people are going to point this out and say, look, that's definitely man-made. Yes, that is man-made. That was made by the owners of the cave, the ones that actually do the tours, because I believe this was the area where they used to hold weddings in one of the areas, and then they built something so that like a string quartet could go up and play music because of the acoustics. So you'll see a guardrail there too. Excuse me. Just some more close-ups of the cave. Tried to get as many pictures as I could to see if I found anything as I was looking, and yeah, nothing really. Can't really see it here, but the water is coming through here. Excuse me. So the water from the river came through from the other side of the cave, and you really couldn't see well down there. And we have more of this. And again, yeah, it can look like melt. And I think that a lot of this looks like it could be biological. Now, what they tell you is that it is, I believe, calcite. And I'm not saying that that's not what it is, but it looks like it could be biological. That looks like a face, doesn't it? Um, some of the stuff I found, this is a really good example of the hardened clay and mud. I might have next picture. No, it might be a different one. Yeah, you see this here. So yeah, so I don't really know what to make of this. This they actually call the giant turtle, this thing right here. To me, it looks like a blob of blubber. Like that's what that reminds me of. Well, I'll show you a better picture of that in a bit. Just some more photos of what, yeah, little, I guess you would still call them stalactites on there. I'm not really sure. And this is what I'm talking about, some of the things that just kind of look gelatinous. I know they're not. I know they're hard and they just look that way because they're wet. But some of it appears that it would have been gelatinous at some point. Okay, so this was really interesting. I know it's really blurry. The reason that it is because I didn't get a better shot because as soon as I was ready to take another shot, he turned the light back on. So there's an area of the cave where there is this algae on the ceiling of the cave that when you shine a black light on it, this is what it looks like. And it reminded me of Roger Spurr on Mud Fossil University when he said that moss grows where there was blood. Now, this is algae, and I know that algae and moss are two different things, but it did make me wonder if it would be possible that algae would also be inclined to grow in areas like that, because that certainly does look like a blood red, doesn't it? So that's just what that made me think of. This is more of the mud clay inside the cave. And that's more, you can't see from this photograph, but up to here was probably at least 8, 9 feet high. Like I was pointing up as I was taking these pictures. More of the same, more of the mud and clay. And I was trying to take a picture of a crevice that was up there. So I don't know. Does anyone see anything that appears to be melted building or anything? Again, I'm just, of the things that I did find in here, I found it to look more biological, if anything. Here's another photograph of what they call the giant turtle. And yeah, it reminds me of blubber. See, it kind of reminds me of this. This is a decomposing whale, and it just reminds me of that. Just wet. That really, now that again looks like it was once gelatinous, like some form of blubber or tissue, something like that. But again, I could also see how people would see a melted structure in that as well. Really good. And then we got a nice picture of the tour guide and yeah, this was really cool looking. And I felt like as we were standing there, I felt like I was inside of a giant creature. Like that's the feeling that I got when looking at this stuff. I kind of felt like, Jonah in the big fish. I kind of felt like something sort of like that. More of the same. This is just a close up showing where the string quartet would play in the Crystal Chapel where people actually would go down and get married there and everything. More of that melted slash blubber look. And again, like just lots of holes and crevices that I said, I wish that I would have been more adventurous when I was younger, because when I was younger, I grew up in a house. I had woods all around me, woods behind my house, and not once did I leave my yard and go in the woods. Like never. I never once did. And I'm thinking now, why? Why didn't I do that? I was just too content with just being where I was. And now I'm like, if I could just like relive my childhood over again, I would have been exploring the woods. As a teenager, I would have been exploring caves. And I don't mean just cave tours. I'm talking about I would have been getting into those crevices, to see what else could possibly be there. And that's just as we were first walking into the cave entrance. You can see some of my daughters, and that's my friend who went with us. Someone said there it looks like there's a face in this one, and it's just like it just looks like a rock or something. This was also very high into the ceiling, so I was pointing up as I took this photograph. And I think that actually was the last one. But yeah, unfortunately, no great discoveries, but it was still a lot of fun. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work, you can check out my YouTube membership page. And I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.